Hi, welcome back to another edition of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. Thanks for joining me on this Sunday. I hope you're not as cold as we are here in the Ottawa area. It's cold, but it's supposed to be warming up. But heat pumps aren't going to do it for you. And we'll be back to discuss that in just one moment.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Yes, and please do, as Sasha, my cat, demonstrates. Ring the bell. Like the broadcast right now so we can beat the YouTube algorithm. It's amazing how that works. Subscribe if you haven't. Resubscribe if you've subscribed and YouTube has taken you off. I'm hearing that so often now, not just from conservative, small c, conservative broadcasters like myself, but a lot of people out there in the mainstream say they're getting people just taken off, unsubscribed for no reason. So it's important to do that. It means so much. And we're building this station. We're on our way to 20,000 subscribers. I didn't think we'd be there at one time. I appreciate your support so much. And so many of you have reached out and financially helped as well. I thank you for that. I'm not going to ask for money. Some people don't like that. But I appreciate those who have lent a helping hand because it's necessary. The more time I invest in this independent media, the less time I have to invest in other things. So, but I think it's as important. And it's important to talk about heat pumps. Now, why are we talking about heat pumps? Well, I'll tell you, because look at this headline here. Heat pump program costs are on track, but could jump to $2.7 billion, according to the Parliamentary Budget Office. $2.7 billion. Now, you recall, or you may recall during the Jean Chrétien years, that there was a huge scandal over what was going on in the one of the large departments of government looked after essentially the huge bureaucracy of government services. And it was a disaster. And it was called a $1 billion boondoggle. Well, what Justin Trudeau has on his hands right now with his heat pump program is a $2.7 billion boondoggle. Hey, the price has been adjusted for inflation, which of course Trudeau has contributed greatly to. But now, if you wondering what heat pumps are, here's a little reminder. Yes, they're those things they plug in the backyard and they supposedly bring you heat. That's why they're called a heat pump. But there's a little problem. They don't work. Now, we'll investigate this a little further. But where is the energy going to come to run all of these heat pumps? Now, if everybody who's eligible for their so-called free heat pump requests one, the price is going to be almost $3 billion. Now, is that a good investment or a bad investment? Well, it's a really stupid investment because it's Justin Trudeau making their recommendation about spending money. And believe me, if this guy was giving stock market tips, I wouldn't be listening because his judgment's very bad. What's the problem with heat pumps? Well, as Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan pointed out, and I've done a lot of research when Trudeau first started trying to hawk these heat pumps. I said, something doesn't sound right about these things because I think these really were made for warmer climates where the heat pump is sort of a stopgap measure in fairly moderate winters, mild winters, like, say, Florida. Do they work in Canada? Well, as Scott Moe points out in this post on X, they only work basically up to minus 25 degrees Celsius. And some estimates are even higher than that. From minus 20 to minus 25, the performance of a heat pump is negligible. After minus 25, at the very least, it stops working. So that means what happened recently here in Canada? Well, we're in a deep freeze here in Ontario right now, Eastern Ontario, but it's nothing compared to what they went through in Alberta. Now, Alberta went through like minus 63 with 63, with the wind chill factor. It was about minus 40, minus 45. Now, I've lived in Alberta. I know how cold that is. If you're walking down the streets of Edmonton with a cold wind in your face, you can't wait to get inside. It's cold. But this was a veritable disaster in the province of Alberta during the last cold snap, and they're going through another one right now. But they actually almost broke the electrical grid in the province because there was such a demand for power. Now, your electric car battery, if you're unfortunate or stupid enough to own an electric car, is not going to work in those kind of temperatures. So the province and the electrical and the hydro companies begged people to stop using power. Unplug your phone. Unplug devices in your house that you're not using, that are not absolutely mandatory. Stop using power because we're going to have rolling blackouts. Now, you hear about these things in the summer because of air conditioning putting stress on. But rolling blackouts into winter, people can die in the winter because of the cold. It is a lot worse than having your air conditioner shut off in the summer. You can die in minus 40 degree temperatures, and your house gets cold very fast. So here's the problem. All I see in the mainstream media after this is people are wondering about how climate change created the cold temperatures, because wasn't it always global warming in the past? Yeah, of course it was. And they're still saying that yes, the earth is warming up too fast, too quickly, and we have to reduce the overall global warming by 2 degrees Celsius. Now, of course, this is this magic number that they're trying to create hysteria over reaching this objective. But every time we get into January, February, and the temperatures plummet, suddenly, well, it's not just about global warming. Climate change also creates any kind of climatic disaster, any kind of climatic dysfunction. And so if it's cold, got to be climate change. And the mainstream media immediately pumps out the articles about everybody's worried about climate change because it's getting cold now. And how did climate change affect the cold snap? And climate change is still the real issue, not that people are going to freeze in the winter, not that the government is so cruel, it's trying to shut off the power, not that the Liberal government is so insane and so toxic. All they can talk about is climate change, and they won't talk about the needs of Canadians to heat their homes. So Trudeau thinks the heat pumps are going to work. Let me show you again this hilarious video of Justin Trudeau talking about heat pumps as being the panacea to solve Canada's home heating crisis. Don't worry. All we have to do is plug in a heat pump. Let's listen.
Heat pumps, des thermopompes électriques. They're an efficient, affordable, cleaner way to both heat and cool your home. That's why everyone's talking about them. We've been working with provinces and territories right across the country to make sure we're installing heat pumps and phasing out home heating oil. Because the fact is, it's good for the environment, but it's also good for your wallet. People who switch from heating oil to heat pumps can save on average $2,500 a year. That makes a huge difference both for your bottom line, but also for the future that we're building for our kids. Seamus,
sign up. And for everybody else, we are going to work out plans so that you're not having to pay that big upfront cost that keeps so many people from getting onto heat pumps. We'll look after that, and we will pay it out over the savings that you will accrue over the years to follow.
this is all part of how we build a better future for everyone.
Yeah. So you're going to be saving all of this money, but what Trudeau's not telling you is that maybe you'll save some money, but you're going to be freezing and your house won't be warm. But don't worry. You won't have to be using any of that awful fossil fuels. You won't have to be using any oil, no natural gas, or anything that is not approved by the federal government. Now, the other problem here, of course, is that how do we power heat pumps? Is there a magical source? There must be, right? There must be some magical source of power for these things. Because, I mean, otherwise, it wouldn't make sense, would it? Because if all of these people are going to be getting heat pumps and plugging them in, isn't that going to put a tremendous strain on the electricity grid? Because guess what, folks? That's what powers a heat pump. It's electricity. And as we all know, electricity doesn't come from nowhere. In some cases, it's produced by coal-fired plants. But if you don't have hydroelectricity, like they do in Ontario and Quebec, well, you're just out of luck because that's not considered to be clean. And so, no, natural gas won't do. And as our environment minister and climate change minister, Stephen Guilbeault, you know, the felon from Greenpeace who used to climb the CN Tower just for fun to produce another stunt for his environmental extremist agenda. Well, Guilbeault, he's out there, of course, selling electric cars. And if you're really, really desperate, maybe you'll buy an electric car just to think you're somehow helping the environment or fighting climate change by doing so. But Guilbeault has been quite clear that the only way to fight climate change, really fight climate change, is to sacrifice, is to shut the lights off in the home, turn off the gas, turn off the oil, turn off all fossil fuels, stop driving your car, stop flying anywhere, and then you're fighting climate change. Then you're going to be living in a cave. You might as well be. I've been saying this for months, but every time we come into winter, why do we hear less from the federal government about how climate change is causing global warming? It's because it's profoundly idiotic to say that when people are worried about freezing to death. So here's Guilbeault telling you that what you got to do is shut off the power, shut off the lights, and then you're fighting climate change. And here's Trudeau trying to sell you a heat pump. I just find it incredible that they think Canadians are this stupid. Now, my question is, how is the Liberal Party and how are members of the Liberal Party benefiting from the sale of heat pumps? Yeah, there's got to be a connection. Follow the money, because you know this has nothing to do with so-called fighting climate change. This has nothing to do with creating a panacea for home heating. This has nothing to do with creating a viable alternative to fossil fuels. Somebody's going to get rich off of this scheme because it's an idiotic, imbecilic scheme. And all it can do is make money improperly for people who have no business being in this scheme at all. Because heat pumps are not going to work. And that is quite clear. Now we know it's a $2.7 billion boondoggle. Liberals are very good at creating boondoggles. And the green energy that you hear Trudeau and Guilbeault talking about, in the first place, there's not enough of it to replace fossil fuels. It is not a miraculous solution. There's not enough green energy to run a modern industrialized society. It just isn't there. And there's no transition period here. We are being forced to get rid of the power that keeps us warm, that drives our cars, that enables us to eat before there's even a viable alternative for it. Now they talked about the just transition. Turned out that was the Justin transition, as in Justin Trudeau, because there was no rhyme or reason to it. It was not thought out. It's still not thought out. And you can see by the escalating problems with a lack of response to freezing temperatures in this country, that's not going to work. I want to listen to former Liberal MP Dan McTeague, who is the president of Canadians.
To subsidize their building,
for affordable
asking
energy.
them to subsidize their purchasing, asking to subsidize their infrastructure. Imagine if Henry Ford was told in 1903, when he began with the Model Ts, that the only way in which he could displace the horse and buggy with his new vehicle would be to have massive subsidies. What a distorted world we would live in today. The frank reality is that Canadians should not put up with what this government is promoting.
Now, Dan, who used to be a Liberal MP, has told me on a number of occasions, and he said this on the broadcast, he could not function, he could not work in a Justin Trudeau cabinet / caucus because he thinks Justin Trudeau is so completely off base. And he's called Stephen Guilbeault a Marxist, a Manchurian candidate, a useful idiot. And that's exactly what he is. So what is Dan saying here is that they honestly expect to replace fossil fuels with a solution that isn't one, but we're still going to do it. And we're going to subsidize that non-existent solution with your tax dollars, even though it's not going to work. Now, this would be called insanity if this is how anybody lived their life, thinking that they had a solution that wasn't one, and they decided to put all of their finances into that non-existent solution. They would be bankrupt and ruined in no time at all. And that's exactly how this country is going with Trudeau's green energy policy. We cannot subsidize a solution that doesn't work, that isn't going to work. Electric cars are not going to sell. There are more and more electric cars piling up in the car dealers because people know they're not a solution. When last weekend in Ottawa, people were waiting 3 hours to recharge their cars. Largely, that's a problem because there are no recharging stations. But can you imagine waiting 3 hours to gas up your car? I think you'd say, hey, something wrong here, folks. But people were waiting 2 to 3 hours to recharge their cars in the freezing cold. And when your car is out of power as an electric car, it's out of power. No, you can't run the heater. So this is a insane non-solution to a very real problem. But all you're going to get from Justin Trudeau is talk about how Canadians are fighting climate change and how they're making such a difference. And of course, as I've said many times, Canada produces less than 5% of greenhouse gas emissions. We have a very small portion of the global carbon footprint. So even if Canada went back to the Stone Age and stopped living in a modern industrial economy, turned off the power, shut off the gas and oil, and just retreated into caves, we would have virtually no effect on the global carbon footprint. So ultimately, this is all about politics. This is all about the Liberals keeping you distracted from what's really important. And my God, there are so many things that are important that the Liberals don't want to talk about, do they? So this is a warning. Don't buy an electric car. Don't buy into it. We are going to ensure that gas-powered cars are still on the road in 2030 and 2035 because threats to eliminate them are based on authoritarianism and insanity. And it's not going to work. And if you think your electric car is going to hold up in minus 40-degree temperatures for a week, it's not going to happen. And isn't it interesting? While the mainstream media continues to applaud all of Justin Trudeau's efforts to fight climate change, while they continue to run story after story about how Canadians are obsessed with, concerned about, worried about climate change, they don't make the connection between the increasing backlog of unsold electric vehicles at the auto dealers and the fact that electric cars are not a solution, that it's not going to happen. And besides, it is virtually impossible to replace the battery because we can't make batteries fast enough. We can't get the raw materials fast enough to make the batteries. It is compounded idiocy, one thing after another. So please continue to watch what's happening. Don't fall for this hoax that we are in some sort of existential threat, that we are facing the end of civilization as we know it within 10 years. Al Gore said that 15 years ago. Supposedly, the eastern seaboard of the United States is supposed to be covered with water by now. But all of those good liberals still have their huge homes on the eastern seaboard of the United States, like Martha's Vineyard. Still not underwater. The polar caps haven't melted. It didn't happen because it's all been a lie. And the heat pumps, and Dan McTeague has said that on my broadcast, that if all of the people who are eligible for a heat pump in Atlantic Canada get one, get their free taxpayer paid for heat pump, it's going to destroy the electrical grid in Atlantic Canada. It can't accommodate all of these people plugging in their heat pumps. So let us hope and pray for a day when we can stop being forced by an authoritarian Trudeau government to do things, to make energy choices that are not only against our own interest, but that are propelling Canada to catastrophe. Because it's not just about energy, it's not just about the environment, it's about rising costs for food and other materials. And if we can't grow food, if we can't produce food, if we can't transport food, if we have vacant grocery stores, Canadians are going to starve. And that's something to worry about. Thanks for watching today. I appreciate your input and your comments. Please tell a friend or family member about Stand on Guard. And I'll be back tomorrow with another